Hey everybody, this is Nick. Before we dive into this episode, do us a big favor and click subscribe in your podcast player or on YouTube. By doing so, you will be alerted every time we post a new episode, and if you feel so inspired, you could also thumbs up or comment to get us more engagement. I also want to remind everybody that the fair is back June 24th to the 26th at the MREA campus in Custer, Wisconsin. We have a beautiful campus. There'll be thousands of the nicest people that you would ever hope to meet here, and we promise the weather will be beautiful. For more information or to buy tickets, go to theenergyfair.org. That's theenergyfair.org. We hope to see you there.
This episode of the Rise Up podcast features 2022 Energy Fair keynotes Bob Blake, founder and CEO of SolarBear and executive director of Native Sun Community Power, and John Farrell, the co-director of the Institute for Local Self Reliance and the director of Energy Democracy Initiative, who joined Nick to discuss the role of tribal autonomy, the power of utilities, and how they interact. The episode also features Ellen Barlas, MREA's Solar Workforce Manager, to discuss the Clean Energy Career Fair, solar workforce development in the Midwest, and Midwest Solar Job Resource Center, solarenergy.jobs.
Well, it is our honor today to be joined by Bob Blake and John Farrell. We've interviewed both of you before. Bob is multifaceted here. He leads solar project development with SolarBear and is the executive director of Native Sun Community Power Development. And John joins us from ILSR, the Institute for Local Self Reliance. And John, you're the director of Democratic Energy there. And I thought it would be really great to get together. And Bob, you've been working with tribal communities all over the Midwest on local clean energy development. John, all over the country, talking to folks. You're the author of a book that looks at the energy potential, a report that looks at the energy potential of all 50 states, and you have your own podcast. So I'm happy to just have a conversation today and compare notes. How are you both doing?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, doing well here too. Thank you.
Yeah, Bob, you're on the road today, going to a solar project site. Where are you at?
I'm up in Red Lake, Indian Reservation in northern Minnesota. It's about 27 miles just north of Bemidji. And we're just looking at the different sites and trying to figure out exactly what's going to go where and where's going to go what.
Awesome. Yeah, maybe we'll start with you today, Bob. I see it's just last time we talked, you were talking about this EV charging network, tribal EV charging network, and I see featured here on the Native Sun Community Power Development website. Do you want to just talk to us about what's happening?
Yeah. So the Department of Energy came out with a FOA around like what could certain sections of the country could do projects. And they were looking for ideas. And at the time, there was the Line 3 situation that was happening, and I was approached by my program director, and she said, "Hey, Bob, we should do an electric vehicle charging network." And I says, "Hey, let's do an electric vehicle charging network pipeline and connect with Standing Rock, and let's make a story out of it and drive people to start driving electric vehicles." So that's exactly what happened. And so we embarked on the development work of it and putting in the request to the DOE. And we were the highest awarded amount from the Department of Energy, and Secretary Granholm and Vice President Harris made the announcement down in Pennsylvania. And it was pretty cool. So really excited about that. The Department of Energy was just in town for the EV car share program here in St. Paul, Minneapolis with Mayor Fry and Mayor Carter. And so they wanted to spend a couple hours with me afterwards. So we got to talk, and there'll be some press out on this eventually, but we're just in the beginning stages of it. The Department of Energy is kind of lagging behind right now because they got so many different projects out there right now. So we got kind of caught up with that. So we're just now starting the planning for this program.
And how many tribes are going to be involved in that?
Oh, all of Minnesota into North Dakota and South Dakota. And so I liken it, like a Route 66 or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, because everybody's been cooped up in their homes. And I was thinking, people could get out in their electric vehicles and they can travel this. They can go out and spend money in rural areas. And people in rural areas can actually see like how renewable energy and the electrification of their communities can really benefit their communities, right? And so it's about taking this technology out where it's not really accepted, right? And really showing and demonstrating it. And then obviously, I hope then some people will say, hey, let's start looking into more electric vehicles and renewable energy projects out here.
Maybe we'll stick with electric vehicles here for a little bit and move to you, John. You've been working on a number of programs. I think maybe we would call them EV tangential programs. I'm wondering what you're saying as far as electric vehicle development in Minnesota or other communities, anything inspiring that you've come across recently?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I mean, I think the thing that always excites me the most, and there was a story out not too long ago about this, is things like electric buses, school buses in particular. You have such a great intersection of like public health because you don't have to have the kids riding on a vehicle that puts out harmful fumes. You have a vehicle that does a lot of starting and stopping, which is perfect for an electric motor, really efficient, can travel a long distance. And of course you have the collective sort of savings that comes for the school district in terms of not having to buy diesel fuel for those buses, which of course right now is especially important because we're seeing fuel prices spike. I think about that a lot lately, how fortunate I am to have an electric car myself, and the fact that I don't have to go fill up at $4 or $4.50 a gallon or whatever it is that folks are paying. I just get to plug into my house at night in my garage and have it full again by the next morning. So yeah, I mean, those are, to me, that's kind of what is exciting. And I think Department of Energy has been involved in, and I've seen a number of communities across the country make investments in school buses as one of the kind of like first big public investments, which I think is really exciting. One thing I just keep wondering about, and Bob may even know more about this in terms of the work that he's doing, is as in the first generation of electric vehicles, you had cars like my Nissan Leaf goes like 85 miles, right? So the idea of being able to have access to a charger is really important, right? You can't drive super far. You can cover your daily commute with it, maybe a couple of days, but then you're going to need to plug in. This next generation of cars is 200, 300 miles of range. The American average daily drive is like 30 miles round trip, including errands and getting to and from work. You probably don't need to charge as often. And I was just curious if there's any work around like even just access to a basic like 120 volt outlet in a public space. Can you stick them on light posts? Can you have them accessible other places? Because other than long distance travel, I don't think people are going to necessarily need to charge quickly with the newer generation of electric cars. So I don't know. That's something I've been thinking about a lot, is this idea of like, what's the intersection there? And I guess my other question too for Bob about his project is there an intersection between solar and electric vehicles? Can you supply the electric vehicle chargers that are going to be on tribal lands with solar as you're doing that?
Yeah, great questions, John. And I think about Moore's Law, right? Every couple of years, things get better. You know what I mean? I foresee a day when, I mean, we've got our vehicles, they're so efficient and they're so put together that, I mean, they're like driving 500 miles on one charge. You know what I mean? And that's really what's going to happen. And a friend of mine just got back from Denmark, or it was Amsterdam, and there was electric charging stations like every 10 feet. I mean, they were all over the place. And he took a picture and he showed me, and he was like, this is incredible. Look at all these charging stations. And I foresee the cities eventually doing that and putting up these charging stations. And my hope is that then they can use that to also help with their budgets. You know what I mean? And that being kind of like a public service, so to speak. So, I mean, that's what I would like to see. The other part is too, yes, absolutely. I am looking into that. I am working with the University of Minnesota. How do we take the solar project that we're building in Red Lake and then use it to supply energy to the entire intertribal network? That's exactly what we're looking into. And so I liken it to what they're doing here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, how this entire EV network is renewable energy. It would be the same thing, but on a bigger scale. And so Gabe's got a little computer program that the DOE helped him get started. So we're going to mess with that and see if we can't use that to help us figure this out. So yeah, it's really exciting, but yeah, we are working on that. Yep.
We'll be right back with the Rise Up podcast. We'd like to take a moment to thank our Rise Up solar training partners, NAACP, fighting for policies needed to advance the society that fosters sustainable, cooperative, and regenerative communities that uphold the rights for all people in harmony with the earth, NAACP.org. Renewable Energy Partners, developers of a wide range of solar and other state-of-the-art energy systems that meet our customers' needs and create jobs and economic opportunities for underserved communities. RenewableEnergyPartners.com. Solidarity, a Democratic membership organization building energy democracy in Highland Park, Michigan, and neighboring communities through education, organizing, and community clean energy. Solidarity.com. Walnut Way Conservation Corps, founded in 2000 by Lindsay Heights residents to reclaim and redevelop the economic health and vitality of their community, walnutway.org, and Wisconsin Green Muslims, connecting faith, environmental justice, sustainability, and healing through education and service, wisconsingreenmuslims.org. We would also like to remind all of you that the 2022 Energy Fair workshop offerings are now online. Head to theenergyfair.org to view all of the great workshops available this summer. And now, back to the Rise Up podcast.
Yeah, maybe we could use this topic to start talking about the democratic decision making and the processes it takes to take these new technology innovations and the rapid pace of technology innovation and the Venn diagram that is all decision makers in the energy space. And just on your website, Bob, you have a quote here, which I think is really great and kind of leads into this conversation, which it says, Native Son wants to help Native people engage in civic and democratic life in ways that advance a just energy transition. And so maybe we can start and compare the opportunities in and outside of tribal country. Having some experience with in tribal country, there's a lot of democratic organizing that goes on through tribal councils. And in this project, we talk about electric vehicles and what the end result might be, right? You have this planning grant with multiple tribes involved and a network, so multiple tribal councils. Talk to us a bit about in like tribal territory, how decisions are made. Do you have less of a bureaucracy than what we deal with in, like, say, in Minneapolis, St. Paul area, where there maybe is an overlap of 12 different federal, state, and local agencies that will end up controlling in some way the way that this rolls out? How do these projects happen in tribal territory? Who are the decision makers?
Yeah. So here's the secret, everyone. Every state, like MnDOT, has a tribal liaison. And for the state of Minnesota, that's Adrian Cotero, I believe his last name is. And so you work with Adrian, you then go to the different tribes and work with their roads department. Every tribal nation has a roads department. It's a very big, important part of the infrastructure for tribal nations. You talk to the roads department and you get some ideas on exactly what's their planning going to be like in the future. Where are they going to build a new road? You ask all these questions, right? What's the most roads traveled? Where is your grocery store? You know what I mean? The grocery store is the main focal point of every tribal kind of community. And then you want to go and look at, okay, where's your workforce development center at? Because every tribal nation has a workforce development center. And then the last thing is where's the casino at, right? So those are like the top three areas that you go to. And those are the top three areas that we're going to put in charging stations at. So we'll put in level 2s at the training center and then at the casino. And then we'll put a level 1 at the trading post or at the grocery store. We're also distributing 12 electric vehicles to the Red Lake community and then 8 electric vehicles to the Standing Rock community. And each one of these areas are also going to get a level 2 charger. So wherever these vehicles go, they're also going to get chargers with them. And as John was saying, we have 2 buses. We have 2 electric vehicle buses that are going to Red Lake also. So this is kind of like the infrastructure and how we're putting it up and how we're putting it together. But those are like kind of the first steps that you kind of want to follow. And then I've already contacted these tribes about putting electric vehicle charging stations in their communities. Of course, this was a while ago. Now I'm going to come back to them and say, hey, I pinpointed these areas. This is where they're going to be at. Can I get your blessing, so to speak? And then will you guys take ownership of them? You know what I mean? And can you guys take care of the operation and maintenance on these things? And so this is part of the conversations that I'll be having over this summer with each and every one of these tribes.
Yes. So I guess in that context, what in in this development process, how are the tribes coordinating together? I know there's the Midwest Tribal Energy Resources Association, which kind of is a loose affiliation of tribes, but is there kind of like a Midwest Tribal Council, or are you just kind of the glue that sticks all of these tribes in this EV project together?
Yeah. So I'm in a group called the Native Nation Rebuilders, and it's actually funded by the Bush Foundation, and it helps Native people with different types of civic engagement, leadership skills that they can then take back to their tribal nation and basically work in their community and use these skills, right? And so in my group, I've got tribal members from all of these different reservations that I'm actually putting vehicle chargers in. And we actually have to have a project that we're supposed to do. So I'm doubling this project as my project for the Native Nation Rebuilders program as the EV. And then I'm reaching out to my cohort, and they're actually helping me too get me into the right people and talking with the right people. But Nick and John, I've been going to these reservations my entire life. So I pretty much know like the back. I know these places because I've always been going to powwows. So I mean, for me, I kind of have an idea where I want to put these things, but I really do have to have some consultation with the community there. But they're excited about this because it's new, right? And this is kind of an entryway for them into doing more renewable energy stuff. And that is what the crazy part is in tribal country right now is there. I mean, 6 years ago, when I was talking about all this, I mean, there was no talk about it. Now it's like it's on every tribal nation's tongue. Like, how do we get a solar project together? How do we put together some EV chargers? I mean, this is so exciting, guys. I just can't believe how far this has come.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to kick it to you, John. We went from EV to solar, and in a way, EVs are only as good as the electricity that flows into that vehicle. And you've been talking with communities and working with communities all across the country. I think the last time we talked, we were talking about the push to make the main investor-owned utility a public utility. And then I think offline, we were talking about the sustainable energy utility in Ann Arbor. And when you see organizing happening at the community level, what are you seeing that's kind of really got you inspired or motivated out there?
I think the thing that excites me is just how many people and how many communities are out there trying to do something. I actually just talked with a fellow yesterday, Dave Silman. He's with the Suncoast Sierra Club on the Gulf Coast of Florida, like St. Petersburg, some of those other communities there. There's like 4 different cities that have made 100% renewable energy commitments. And like so many places, they're struggling with figuring out how to do it, but they're really engaged in it. They've got city leaders that are engaged. They have sustainability directors. They've got community advocacy groups, and they're really just looking like, how do we solve this problem? And I just found the conversation really engaging because we try as the Institute to provide some tools like that. Like we have this thing called the Community Power Toolkit. It's an interactive way that you can kind of see stories of what communities have tried on this path toward lowering carbon emissions, building clean energy, doing electric vehicle networks, and whatever in service to building up the energy resources in the local community. And there's just so many good stories to tell. I mean, you referenced earlier that we've got a podcast. I host a podcast called Local Energy Rules. And I think my favorite part about it, honestly, is that I just get to invite people on and talk to them about, well, what is it that you're doing in your community? We had a whole series called Voices of 100, where we had leaders from cities coming on and saying, okay, we've made the commitment. What is it that we're doing now? Try to meet that commitment. What kind of plans are we laying? Who are we engaging in the community? Are we taking advantage of all the variety and diversity of folks that are in our community in terms of coming up with those plans and making sure that we're addressing the needs? I still remember a great interview with the sustainability director out in Providence, Rhode Island, and she talked about the fact that their climate change plan for the city ended up being called a climate justice plan, because what they did is they reframed it around the way that community members were saying, well, our issue is with like the pollution from the port. We don't care so much about the carbon emissions component of it. We're worried about the air that we breathe and the impact on asthma. Well, of course, the two are related, right? Like it's the same diesel fuel that emits carbon that's emitting all of the noxious fumes and the particulates that are causing the health problems. And so I just get energized by all of the work that communities do to organize around these issues, the way they identify the problems that matter most to them. And I just love Bob's story here about identifying the places in the tribal communities where to put these EV chargers. Like you talk to the community, or, being a tribal member for so long, Bob can say like, oh, well, these are the places where people go. These are the places where people are going to need access to that resource. And so I just always find that really energizing in the way that communities are able to identify that and to articulate what it is that they see as important to them in the pursuit of clean energy.
Yeah, for you, Bob, thinking in that context, one of the things that I see that just crops up all the time is limitations, legal limitations and financial limitations that really revolve around the incumbent utility and their business model. Yet in tribal territory, though it's not easy, there is a clear pathway to the development of kind of like tribal utility autonomy. And I guess I wonder, as you're working, developing solar projects, and you're working with the major tribal players and now electrifying transportation are the very first steps in that. Do you have discussions or have your sights on this idea of, well, what about this leading to a tribal energy authority or some tribally managed utility entity that better enables these types of projects?
Yeah, that's my retirement plan, Nick. I'm gonna go run Red Lake's tribal utility, and I'm actually
Great.
I know this is gonna sound funny, but I'm actually building it. So from down here, I'm building it. But Red Lake just got the Tribal Energy Development Organization status, TITO status, and we are the first tribal nation in the entire United States to get this status. So
Congratulations.
yeah, and so it was all about Bob Blake bumping his head, talking to attorneys at Baker Tilly over in Madison, Wisconsin, and me talking to him like, "Hey, listen, I've been working with Yakima Power here. Can we figure out a way to help me to develop our own tribal utility?" And these guys over at Baker Tilly at the law firm were like, "Yeah, we've heard a lot about you too, by the way." So that was really cool. And so we started talking and they started working with us. And we applied for a tribal energy development grant, a TED grant. And then that led us into looking at the TITO status and looking at our plans. And then we had some investors called National Energy from London, England, come into town and wanted to meet us and want to help us build, utility scale solar. And so this is kind of what we're all doing right now. And obviously it'll come out more in the press when we get going on it, but it's just in the early stages of development. But
You heard it here first, everybody. Not even in the press
yeah,
yet.
the TITO status is if you Google Red Lake TITO, TEDO, that will pull up.
Fine, I'm gonna do it
Yep,
now.
yep, that will pull up Red Lake TITO. But that was just made, I want to say like 5 months ago, 4 months ago is when it happened. But essentially, I mean, this allows me to sell power to San Francisco if I want. You know what I mean? So this is a real game changer, and I'm really excited for where this is going. We are looking at between 200 and 400 megawatts of solar is what we're looking at. And so, I mean, literally, we could supply power to half the state in northern Minnesota. But we're also, and I've been working with MnDOT on this, is supplying power to their upper end of MnDOT's offices in the northwest and northeast areas of the state of Minnesota. So we're going through that process. We went through that process, and now we're doing the study. And so all this is crucial, Nick and John, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a tribal energy advisory board up at the state right now to get formed. And what I'm trying to do with this tribal energy advisory board is to be able to have communication between the states and the tribes around energy development. And because a lot of these power lines are going to be going through their territories. And so I'm not saying there's going to be bad actors here, but we want to keep everybody on the honest side. You know what I mean? And what I do hope for eventually is that these are the seedlings for a tribal utilities commission. And what I hope to do here is make this a pathway for every other state and for all the rest of the tribes to follow. So that's what I'm trying to do here in the state. Athena Hollins carried the bill this year for us, and it's probably not going to get passed this year because it's all wrapped up in all this other bills. But I mean, I'm going to keep pushing it, guys, and I'm going to try to keep working on it. So I'm really excited about all this because I think that this is where tribal nations want to go. They want to create their own utilities. They want to have their own linemen trained up. They want to have their own electricians. And when I look at, we send about $40 million off the reservation each year to the local co-op. And I mean, if we could just cut that in half, right? I mean, if we could just keep 20 million in a community that has a median income of $10,000, what kind of economic impact that can have in these tribal communities? Because at the very heart of all the problems that these tribal communities are facing, it's poverty. And so what is Bob Blake really trying to do? I'm trying to I'm trying to see if renewable energy can help solve a human health crisis, because that's what I think is happening in tribal communities. It's a human health crisis. And I'm betting, I'm really betting, and I told Gabe Chan this too. I said, you might get me as a PhD student, but I'm thinking that this is going to be this. Can we solve and can we gauge it through quantitative and qualitative data that this is making the community healthier by implementing renewable energy? I think that's what's going to happen. But I mean, obviously, I don't know, but I'm hoping that we could create jobs, create opportunities from this. And Red Lake is like a big testing ground for it. It's a big petri dish right now for me, guys. And if I could prove that this works here, then I could bring it to legislators and to into our politicians and say, look what happened in this community. We need to do this all over the country. We can't just do it here. We need to do this everywhere. And then what I'm hoping is that advances and that catapults us to a faster transition to renewable energy and just transition as well.
I'm really just curious, Bob, to ask you about, this, you mentioned this tribal energy development like status that Red Lake has, and that's the first in the country. Could you talk a little bit more? You mentioned like, oh, now you could sell electricity to San Francisco. Tell me, I'm really curious, like, what does it mean for how you could supply electricity to like tribal members on the reservation or to other tribes across Minnesota? Like, how does it let you do that? How does that conflict or not with the rules we have for other utilities and how they operate as monopolies, like in Minnesota, based on state law?
Yeah, no, and so the way that I understand it, John, and this was the way that I understand from the attorneys that we're working with, is that now with the TITO status, as we build out this renewable energy and whatnot, we'll be able to use the power lines to sell to whoever we decide to go into business with or contract with. And so to me, that says then that, I mean, we're going to have our own utility now. Basically, we're generating and we're distributing now. And so that's the way that I understand it, John. And I've got to do more actually, reading up on this, right, guys? But this was just a quick synopsis of what I got from our attorneys, and it's exciting. And so I've been getting called by different tribes across the country, like, we know a lot about this TITO status. How did you get it? Like, how did you pull this off, Bob? You know what I mean? And there's going to be a press release coming out here soon on something else that just happened. But it's this other thing that I put together. Well, it's this other idea that I have about a res network, a renewable energy zone. And so what I'm trying to create is a renewable energy zone and you look in Australia, they have them. And so I want to try to create one in Red Lake. And this was part of our paper, or part of our reasoning of why we wanted this TITO status too. But this helps us, John, with our investors from outside who want to go in with this giant PPA with us, right? And so that's what's really exciting there. And so that's all I can say right now. But I will do my due diligence, John, and I will get to know more about this, because even when the guys came in from London and they were like, "Hey, you're the solar bear. We wanted to meet you." I mean, they were there to meet like our tribal council, but they were like, "Hey, you're the solar bear. You're the guy we've been reading about." I was like, "Hey, all right. Hey, nice to meet you."
So great.
But yeah, that's what's happening right now, guys. And so I hope that this is going to be a way that, because here's the thing, I'm trying to leverage tribal sovereignty. I'm trying to leverage tribal sovereignty to move these big dinosaurs like the utilities, right? Because we're the only people in this country with a government inside this government. And so how do we leverage tribal sovereignty to move these dinosaurs that are stuck in their ways? They have the lobbyists, guys. They have everything. So like, how do we move them to move towards renewable energy a lot quicker? They're the ones with the 80-year coal contracts. You know what I mean? So like, how do we move them where tribal nations can start their own utilities? They can start taking market share. They can start banding up together. They can start selling power on the lines just like the big guys do. Yeah.
visionary. And, I think it's if John's over there. I think John might be getting jealous. I'm not sure. Can't really tell, but it's like the stars really are aligned, because in many tribal territories, utilities and utility affiliates have negotiated very low rates for energy utilities running through tribal land, and all those contracts are coming up. You enjoy a special autonomy in your ability to develop utility, a recognized utility that can connect into wholesale markets and get all the benefits and compete in the space with other utilities. The technology has become available to do all this, and I think the vision seems very much to be there. And it's a matter of, again, kind of comparing notes. It's about democratic organizing, right? And most of the times our limitations are ourselves, our people, and our ability to express a vision and gain support for it and move it forward. So I think this tribal utility recognition is a really great first step.
I tell
Yeah.
Nick, I tell
You know,
John, Nick, I tell the tribes, we're in the gaming industry, which is $1 billion industry. Okay. That's what we do. But let me tell you something. We need to be in the energy industry, and that's $1 trillion industry. We're in the wrong game, guys. That's what I tell the tribes. We need to get in this game. And at the end of the day, what they want to do is they want to provide jobs and opportunities for their people to take care of their communities. And this is the way to do it. Every time you turn on a light switch, those pennies are dropping. And that's my argument, guys, to the tribes.
Well, let's kick this to John. I'm going to put you on the spot, John, because here we go. You have your experiment in real time. You have the ability to develop a utility that really serves people with this new distributed generation technology in a way that increases local economic development, decreases pollution, as Bob says, can even energy is everything, can solve fundamental health problems and economic development. So here's my question to you. What's the best case scenario for utility design? What does a good utility look like? What do they do?
I love this question. I was just thinking, as Bob was talking about his vision and the work that he's doing with tribes, what the contrast is, for example, for folks who watched John Oliver's Last Week Tonight, he did a segment on electric utilities on Monday night, and it was amazing. I mean, it was really talking about the sort of like fundamental challenge that we have in getting renewable energy investment and doing it in a way that provides economic development and jobs more broadly, because utilities really want to keep their claws in it and really hold on to it and prevent sharing in those economic benefits. I think, let me give a couple ways of thinking about this. One is that, I actually have a piece that'll be published in the Energy News Network in the next couple of days, where I sort of talked about from where John Oliver started and kind of how he laid out what the challenges are. I think there are like 4 big things that we consider doing to like reshape the utilities that we have. So let me start with that, and then I can give a little bit of a vision of like what I think the optimal outcome could look like. He talks about the fact that we can reform how utilities get paid and whatnot. I do think that is part of it. One of the key things to do, and this ties in a little bit to that issue of like what the tribes can do, is this, utilities have what's called a franchise. So like whoever sells you your electricity, or whoever delivers the electricity, the poles and wires that run down your alley or maybe run underground to connect to the meter on your home or your business, like they have a monopoly, and that thing's called a franchise. They get that franchise from the city. And in most cases, it's renewable over a certain period of time, but the presumption is that it's perpetual, that it will last forever, that the utility will never have to give up that franchise no matter what they do. And what John Oliver covered in his Last Week Tonight show was a number of utilities that have behaved so poorly, they really shouldn't have the franchise anymore. And so I think one thing we need to be thinking about is when a utility that has a monopoly and a public trust is not behaving the way that we want them to behave, there's no reason we have to continue to allow them to serve us. And that's not to say that we have to like change the whole business model. Like in California, for example, PG&E started a whole bunch of fires, caused billions of dollars in damage, killed a bunch of people. They could just have said, hey, Southern California Edison, another investor-owned utility in the same state, we're just going to give you their territory. You take over. We're going to tell them they have to sell out to you and they're out of the business because they horribly mismanaged this. So one thing we need to do is just hold utilities accountable around that franchise. Another one is like this idea of pay for performance. Last week tonight, they talked about it a little bit. There's one state that does that, Hawaii, one state where the entire regime of how you pay for the utility, how you pay for your utility bills, all that money goes to pay the utility for performance on the things we care about, like clean energy, efficiency, affordability. One state. 49 other states pay utilities just to like spend their money on things. And they tweak it on the sides a little bit here and there, get them to do a little bit of efficiency, tell them they have to do some renewables. But it's fundamentally the same way we've been doing it for over 100 years, and it's broken. And so I think we really need to look at that. The third one is, and this kind of gets more into what you were saying, Nick, about like how you could design a utility right. So if you wanted to stay with the same system, holding them accountable for the franchise, changing their incentives. But I think we really need to think about how we structure the utility market, the electricity market in general, and to ask ourselves, what stuff that what stuff of the electricity business is really still a monopoly and what isn't anymore? In Minnesota in particular, so here where Bob and I are working, utilities own everything from the power plant to the power lines to the substations you might drive by in your city to the power lines in your alley to the meter on your wall. They own absolutely all of it. And the question is, how much of that actually still needs to be a monopoly? Like metering electricity, well, that's probably a monopoly, right? We don't need 17 meters on your house. You don't want to have like swapping them in and out as you change who your supplier is. And you probably don't want more than one like set of wires that runs to all the different homes and businesses. One is enough. The first question to ask ourselves is, does the entity that owns those things need to be a for-profit entity? In some cases, they're not, right? Like a lot of the tribal nations are served by rural electric cooperatives, but a lot of us are served by investor-owned utilities where like they're trying to make money off of running a system that's basically like the roads, right? It's essentially a public resource of how we distribute this essential service to everybody. So I think we really need to be asking ourselves, like, some things aren't monopoly anymore. So if the tribes can generate electricity, if I can put solar on my own rooftop, why does the utility have a monopoly on that? We could break that apart and say, when it comes to power generation, the utility does not have a monopoly anymore. In fact, we'll have a competitive market for that. And a number of states already do that. Another thing we could do is say that like interconnection to the grid, how we manage who gets to connect to the grid and plug in projects, whether it's a big project that the Red Lake Nation's going to do or a small project that I want to do on my home, there's no reason the utility has to be in charge of that as a for-profit thing. In the same way that you decide like who does off ramps and on ramps onto highways, right? It could be a public entity that does that or an independent nonprofit entity that does that. So we're at I think a point of reckoning where we really need to be asking ourselves how this should be run. And I think to just nail down where I think we ought to be going, we ought to be looking at the road network as the model for how we think about doing this, right? If I want to deliver packages or do commerce by traversing the roads in this country, it's all a public network. It's either paid for with federal tax dollars or local tax dollars or what have you, but there's no discrimination in who can use it. There's no perverse incentive of the federal government to try to keep certain people off of it. Like there's a million different package delivery services, FedEx, DHL, the Postal Service, UPS, and they all get to use that system fairly. And we really ought to be thinking about how our electricity service could be delivered in the same way, that we could get essential service and do that without having one big giant monopoly corporation that unfortunately is prone to bad behavior, as John Oliver covered so well, and instead be thinking about how can we minimize the amount of monopoly power that we have in a way that maximizes the way that people have choices, that communities can do what they want, can shape the future of their energy system for themselves.
Yeah, this is a real challenge for you, Bob. You're living like if we today, all of us that are served by the utility networks we have outside of tribal country, we're a bit more trapped, it seems, than you. We would, if we had the opportunity to redevelop our utility system today, much of it would be totally different. We'd never do it the way it is today because as John's saying, with the increase in productivity per unit of electricity through efficiency, we don't need utilities to build new things. That's how they make money, is building things. With the deployment of energy generation technologies like solar that are modular, scalable, have no moving parts, are accessible to everybody, it's putting pressure on the old model, and we have now oppositional with what utilities we serve. And so here it falls to you in tribal country to develop a utility that meets kind of this expectations that you have of serving local people and all of these goals. Do you see that challenge? Do you see stakeholders engaging in the process that you think will show us something new and better?
Ray Wiseman from Yakima Power said to me, he says, Bob, He says, I am here for you as a resource. He says, because what everyone is going to tell you is you can't do it. And that's what everyone told us. We can't do it. And I just went around them. And that's my feeling. And I'm so glad that Ray has been so successful with Yakima Power. I mean, and they weren't even generating. They were just distributing. And they've managed to do it in a way that was so more efficient that they ended up taking a big market share of where they're at out there in Washington. And now they're going to be generating because they're adding solar to their mix now. And so when I see that, and I looked at a lot of different tribal utilities, guys, and I saw Yakima Power being the most closest that Red Lake could copy. And so when I look at what he's done and what that community has done, I know Red Lake can do it. Yes, is there going to be some hiccups? Is there going to be there's going to be some issues there? And guys, I feel blessed. I feel fortunate because I'm in this community. Like, I've been able to be around all of you guys and listen to your ideas the last 6 years. You know what I mean? To really kind of think to myself, how do I implement this in tribal country? You know what I mean? And now it's all becoming reality. And so I'm really hopeful that this all goes through and where it comes out. But Nick, I mean, is it going to be a bumpy ride? Absolutely, it's going to be a bumpy ride. But I've got a tribal council. I've got a tribe that is committed to this. They're excited about it. They see the value in this, and I still got to keep on pushing up at the state of Minnesota to create that tribal energy advisory board. This is all work that just needs to still happen. And I got to tell you guys, I mean, with all these power lines that need to be redone, Minnesota Power had to come through our ceded territory. They had to negotiate with us to bring their power lines from Alberta, Canada, to carry that hydropower to Duluth. And they had to negotiate with us. This is going to be happening all over the country. And what I'm telling tribal nations is, you guys can be a player in this game now. You guys can have a piece of those power lines. Because back when this happened with FDR, tribal nations were just happy to get electricity. But now we're able to be a part of the conversation now. And so that's what's really, I just see Nick as this being another way to take down this old dinosaur who's been really running things. These utilities have really been running things, and to try and democratize energy for everyone. And I always say this too. I say the framers of the Constitution left tribal nations sovereign for this very reason, because they knew at one point in time corporate oligarchy was going to try and take over this government. And that's what tribal nations are there to do, to speak up when the state fails us, when the feds fail us, and cities fail us. With tribal, the chairmen and the tribal officials need to speak up for all of us and for the planet and for the environment. And so that's where I really see, Nick, a lot of this. The big reason why we're doing this.
Whew. That's the real deal there. Well, gentlemen, this is a really good time to be alive, if you're both of you guys, and me too, because we're here to reinvent the way that we all benefit from the world's biggest machine, which is the electricity network that serves us all. And if you out there listening would like to join in this conversation, you can see Bob Blake and John Farrell at the Energy Fair from June 24th to the 26th in vivo. And we'd love to have you there. Before we break though, I'd like to hear any parting thoughts that you might have, or maybe even framing up a little bit what you plan to talk about when you're at the Energy Fair. And maybe we'll start with you, John.
Yeah, thank you. I think I gave somewhat of an overview in terms of this idea of how we should be rethinking the structure of the electricity system. But I think what Bob is doing is really embodying what we hope can happen in that conversation. And his point, I think, about those transmission lines running over tribal lands, to me just highlights what's at stake. Every community has something like that. Every community has an energy resource that utilities right now are taking advantage of going through their community that they could tap, whether it's untapped sunshine or a transmission line that a utility desperately wants to build that's going to make them millions of dollars in profits. And it's all about exercising the leverage that you have in order to hold them accountable. And so I'm just excited for what Bob is doing out there, helping folks in tribal lands realize like we have some power here. We have something that we can say and that we can do. And I would love to see tough negotiations with utilities about power lines because those things are hard to cite anywhere, right? Like those are things that are hard for utilities to do. And they should have to make sure that they compensate people for that benefit that they're going to reap for themselves in building them. And then hopefully it will help us to raise that question of, and what other benefits ought they be sharing as well?
Yeah, I'm excited for the fair, Nick, and to be speaking. And, I guess to everybody out there, I went through the Solar Training Academy. So, I mean, it's a great program. And I'm always championing MREA every time I can. So please, everyone, donate, get involved, and take a class if you can. This is just a great organization. And Nick, you are doing just a wonderful job. And I'm so proud to be a board member and to be a part of all the great work that the MREA is doing. And like I said, I'm just proud to have gone through the academy and actually seen what can happen. Because I don't think that I would be doing what I'm doing if I didn't go through that Solar Training Academy. It's the truth. So thank you, Nick, and thank you for everything that you do. And amigo edge everyone for listening and for having me on.
Honored to have you both. Thank you, Bob. And rise up. Come join the revolution. We'll see you June 24th to the 26th. Thanks, gentlemen.
Oh, thanks again.
Ellen, how are you today?
I'm fine. And how are you, Nick?
I'm doing great. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Ellen Barlas, the Solar Workforce Manager at the MREA. Ellen, before we talk about kind of the big picture about solar jobs in the Midwest, why don't you just tell us kind of like what your day involves of work? What do you find yourself doing mostly during the day?
Mostly, I talk to solar companies all over Wisconsin and surrounding states about their workforce needs, about internships for people who are either coming out of technical or community college training programs or other sorts of training. I talk to a lot of students who are interested in working in the solar industry and tons of other people who I guess you would call stakeholders, instructors, deans, people who are involved in a variety of different organizations, in all involved in trying to meet the workforce needs in the solar industry.
Yeah, so you managed our solar core effort that includes solarenergy.jobs. And as part of that, you're talking to technical college administrators and instructors, students, contractors, and kind of building those bridges in solar workforce. So you've been doing this for a few years now. So what are you hearing out there? What are the needs of the contractors at this point?
It kind of ranges, but the vast majority of contractors just need hands. Solar installers, designers, a huge need that I have noticed more and more over the last 12 to 18 months are qualified salespeople, people who can, explain how a solar system works, but also talk to customers in terms of design, sizing at the front end, and electricians. There's a very huge need for electricians in the solar industry. And, a lot of solar companies have suffered and are continuing to suffer from supply chain issues due to COVID. And so that's been kind of a wrinkle in terms of their workflow and their employment needs. But essentially, they're all looking for people to work.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, right? Because not only are the installers or the contractors looking for installers and sales professionals and just generally have a lot of hiring need, but training programs as well are looking for candidates. And there's a lot of good programs out there. And for the most part, enrollment isn't meeting what we hope to expect for demand. So there's kind of a supply chain issue in the workforce. Can you talk a little bit about why some of the solar training programs that are out there in the Midwest are facing kind of enrollment challenges?
I think that some of them are and some of them aren't. And one of the big drivers to that is if there are local solar installers. So if you have a technical college with active solar installations happening in that region, usually their programs are filling up. And the same is true in the opposite sense. If you have a solar program or even a renewable energy program where there aren't jobs regionally, those are the programs that struggle. And I've seen this all across Wisconsin and Iowa, Illinois, and to some extent in Minnesota, but it's not as clearly divided in Minnesota as it is in Wisconsin and Illinois.
Yeah, you make a good point about a local contractor because there really are these two facets to the solar market, right? There are companies that work on meter connected solar energy and energy storage systems for homes and businesses and municipalities and universities, the schools, the hospitals. Yeah, they serve a local area or regional area. And then there are these very large solar projects that require hundreds and hundreds of laborers. And one of the challenges, you can go and get a job at a local fast food restaurant for $17 an hour and not have any training and not have to travel in the middle of a farm field to install solar panels in all conditions. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about like some of the job demands out there in the market. You talk about these local solar companies. Is their kind of like primary driver, like you said, they're hiring electricians and salespeople, but typically, where are they kind of like looking for students? Are they looking for them off the street? Are they looking for specific skill sets do they need to be graduated and have a certificate? What do these companies want?
And it's hard to generalize, but I think of some specific examples. I live in Northeast Wisconsin, and so I think about the solar companies in our region, and they're hiring straight out of technical college programs. And then those students who have had training at the technical college level oftentimes continue training in more advanced subjects as they go through those jobs. And our internship program, as I've watched some of the interns from our first and second year, they almost always get hired by their host company. So they form that relationship during that 160-hour internship. And then they almost always stay on part time while they finish up a degree or a training program. And then they wind up working full time. And I can think of half a dozen specific examples of that. And those students are students who've had broad training, some of them as much as a 2-year associate's degree. And then there are other companies who are literally looking for installation labor. And that's the kind of labor that doesn't require such advanced training. But I've even seen those people move on up and take advanced training through other training providers other than a 2-year college. And so it's kind of all over the board, but there is a need for trained people.
Yeah, people with practical experience, right? Which is kind of, as you were saying, with the internships, they get
Mhm.
160 hours of practical experience. Or if their training program, like you have at Northeast Wisconsin Technical College, that program provides the students with lots of practical experience.
Mhm.
That tends to be what makes someone valuable, right? That worksite experience or that applied experience.
Oh, for sure. Because the solar companies are busy. They hit the ground running the minute the weather breaks. And training through onboarding is very difficult because a lot of those jobs are unique to the actual job. And to have somebody coming out of a training program who's already had hands-on experience through an internship or even through that training program or both, that's really valuable to a contractor.
Yeah, so you've been working the phones, as we say, talking to all the training providers and talking to all the contractors and talking to all the students. And basically, you're basically like speed dating for
Mhm.
contractors. You're trying to make all these partnerships work. And beyond that, though, you are now really have developed and with the MREA are promoting solarenergy.jobs. You want to talk to us about what that web resource is and where we're going with it?
Sure. We launched solarenergy.jobs, kind of a soft launch about a year and a half ago. And the concept of the site is that it is a resource center for all things workforce in solar. And so we have links back to training programs all over the Midwest. At the technical or community college level, I think we're up to 13 or 14 different training programs. And we have links to MREA training, all the way from the most basic training on up into really advanced training. And then we also have an interactive job board where companies can post jobs and job seekers can find those jobs. And that's really just a marketplace. That's a traditional job board where any company or entity who has an opening at their company can post a job and job seekers can go directly to the company. So we're just providing access to those jobs. And that's essentially what the site is. We have some other resources on there, just data about the solar industry and a little bit of explanation about NABCEP certification and why that's important and how to get it. But that's essentially what the site is.
Good. Yeah, and we're kind of building off of that kind of regional workforce hub. We're having our first in-person clean energy career fair at the Energy Fair, June 24th and 25th in Central Wisconsin. Do you want to talk to us about the career fair and what people can expect?
Sure. The career fair is happening during our annual energy fair, which we haven't had for the last 2 years. So it's kind of exciting. This is the rebirth of the energy fair, and the career fair is a new event. It's going to be from 5 to 7 p.m., both Friday and Saturday evenings. And we're going to provide space for networking and refreshments, which is kind of exciting. But I think it's really going to be an opportunity for companies in the renewable energy industry to come and meet up with training providers and job seekers. And I think it's going to be a great time. And it's pretty informal, so it's not going to require a whole lot of preparation. We just want everybody to come and meet each other and network for a couple hours at our event.
Yeah, and that not having a fair for 2 years, I think it's good to remind people how these things happen. This in-person networking and actually meeting people that represent different businesses and hearing from them how their experiences are, and them meeting job potential applicants. That is how it's all about the people you know, right? And this is going to not only be a widely attended event with many opportunities to network, but this one is specifically designed for job seekers to meet employers that have vacancies. So it's a good opportunity there. And Ellen, maybe I can get you to give convincing argument to any job seeker that's out there listening, a convincing argument of why they should join the solar industry.
I think the solar industry is the future. And I think electrification is happening at every level of our culture. And I think if I have kids that are entering the workforce and their friends, and I continuously encourage them to take advantage of this unbelievable opportunity. I mean, we're having a shift in the way we do things in our world, and solar is part of that shift. And I just can't imagine a better time for especially a young person entering the industry. And one of the, I guess, side benefits of it is that there are so many things you can do in the solar industry. I think a lot of people think it's all about putting panels on roofs, and that isn't true. I mean, there are sales jobs and design jobs and engineering jobs, and of course, installation jobs. But if you're a great person who works well with people, being customer service in the industry. So I would encourage anybody who hasn't made up their mind about what they want to do when they grow up, which includes me, to really consider looking into it and all the opportunities.
Yeah, so come be part of the developing the new energy economy, right? It's going to be fun.
It's
We're
going to
gonna
be
we're
fun.
gonna have a brand new way of producing and using electricity at the end of it. Well, good, Alan. Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with today?
I don't think so. I hope everybody comes to the career fair. I can tell you that in the 3 years that I've been on the phone and on Zoom calls and Teams calls and everything, meeting people, it's just going to be wonderful to have some real human interaction and talk about some of these things in person. And I think it's going to be a great time.
Great, Ellen. Well, I will see you there for
Yes,
sure. So it's a
for
date.
sure.
And thanks, and enjoy this beautiful sunny day.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks again for joining us today. Make sure you subscribe, leave us a review, and for more info on the Energy Fair, go to theenergyfair.org. That's theenergyfair.org, and we will see you there.